Hey, what's up YouTube? This is the Mermail Master coming at you guys from the Team Time Riders Yugioh channel. We are here today with the man, the myth, the legend, Rolex himself, on his channel debut for Time Riders, and I'm not sure about you guys as well, but...
First. Yeah,
that's what debut means.
I don't know what debut means, man.
But anyway, guys, today we've got a special deck profile for you. What do we have here, Mr. Rolex?
So right now we're running a hybrid deck. It's Metaphys with the Invoked engine, and it's pretty simplistic, but it covers the weaknesses for both types. Basically, it's kind of an all-terrain kind of thing that can go up against really any deck of any attribute, but it works well for itself also. It's a really banish-heavy deck.
That's really interesting. I haven't seen a lot of people really utilizing Metaphys lately.
Neither have I. I honestly just finished building it maybe, last week?
Wow.
I played it for the first time today. I actually am very satisfied with it.
That's awesome. All right, anything else you want to say before we...
Shut up. I know, you already know where the things come from.
Shout out to our man right here. Come on. All right.
Nah, just watch and enjoy.
Let's get into it.
See if you like it. Let's get into it.
All right.
Alright, so how y'all want to do this?
So you can start by putting out the...
So we got the big card for I almost never bring this damn thing out. I'm still trying to figure out how the hell to get them out.
So what exactly does he do? So this guy here, I believe, is Metaphys Executor or something, right?
Yes, Metaphys Executor. So he can't be normal summoned or set. He can only be special summoned by banishing 5 Metaphys cards with different names from the graveyard, or face up on the field. He can't be destroyed. He can't be banished. He can't be banished by card effects. But once per turn, if my opponent controls cards on the field more than I do, I can target one of my banished Metaphys monsters and special summon it. But then it gets banished at the end of the turn, which works because every single Metaphys card has something that it does once it's banished. So once he's on the field, he kind of just sets up the engine for every other Metaphys card there is.
Gotcha. You don't find him too hard to summon with that 5 banish restriction, though, right?
Well, I would if it said 5 monsters, but it says 5 cards.
Oh.
It says 5 Metaphys cards.
Gotcha.
And the archetype, there's not a really big monster pool for Metaphys, but there is a pretty big archetype pool.
Yeah.
Like it has a field card, 2, 3 spells and traps, and then all of the monsters that go with it. And since this kind of works almost like the light version of Shadal's in the aesthetic way that every monster is actually from somewhere else.
Yep.
Like, for example, the next card in the set is Metaphys, and if you've been playing this game long enough, you know what Sacred Phoenix and Metaphys does, and he does the exact same thing in the Metaphys build than he does at normal. When he's special summoned, he pops the field. The only difference is he has an extra Metaphys effect that sits here and says that when he's banished during the next standby phase, he can go back into the deck to add another Metaphys card from the deck to the hand.
That's basically a recycle effect, right?
Yeah, pretty much. He gets to do stupid things when he hits the field, the basic Metaphys effect that pops all the spells and traps on the board, except I think he only pops face downs, I think. Yep, he only pops set spells and traps, which is a little
bit... That's a good MST right there.
Yeah, it's a really good MST. For when you don't have the, the double heavy storm or the regular heavy storm on you.
It'd be more like Galaxy Cyclone.
Yeah, it's a little bit like Galaxy Cyclone.
Yeah. All right.
Then you get this one. He's like the only he's the only unassisted normal summon in the deck.
But this helps you mill cards to
yes,
it's
yes,
so
it does. He also sets up for the other Metaphys because when he's normal summoned or when he's special summoned, he automatically banishes the top 3 cards on the deck.
It's a must play 3 in the MF.
Yep, it's a must.
So do you ever have problems with his 1500 attack?
No, it gains attack.
Nope, because he gains 300 attack for every Metaphys card that he kicked off with that ability. And to be fair, if you ended up kicking off a Metaphys card with that Metaphys card that you just kicked off is also going to get its effect later on, whether it be during the end phase or the standby phase. Then you get Tyrant Dragon.
This guy is my favorite of all the Metaphyses.
Now, Tyrant Dragon still works the exact same way that the original Tyrant Dragon did. He's unaffected by traps, and if he attacks a monster, he gets attacked one more time in the row. He gets to attack one more time in a row. But his Metaphys effect basically says that during the standby phase of the next turn, I can shuffle him into the deck, then choose a Metaphys card in my deck and special summon it. So a lot of the Metaphys cards also have special summoning effects, so I can go into Ragnarok and get the kickoff 3 effect. I can go to the Metaphys to pop the board, so depending on what Metaphys I summon, I can kind of change my strategy depending on what the opponent's board's looking like. Like if my opponent is running Trick Stars and he's not smart enough to activate it, I can sit here and pop his board, or a lot of back row heavy decks Metaphys can take care of my problem for me. Or I can sit here and run Tyrant Dragon just for the whole, I'm going to swing on something for 29 and swing on something again for 29. After that is the one that I don't usually bring out that much, which is Daedalus. who's based on Leviathan Dragon Daedalus from a long since disgusting water deck. But when he's banished, I can sit here and choose a Metaphys card in my deck and banish it straight from there. So also lets me kind of aggro into the whole banish engine and everything like that. But he also has another effect that I can banish all special summon monsters. That when he's special summoned from the effect of a Metaphys monster, he banishes all special summon monsters on the field. And in this format, damn near everything is special summoned. So this makes him really, really potent if I can manage to get him off.
Because it's just basically like doing the same thing to just normal monsters.
Yeah, pretty much.
Special summon, yeah.
Pretty much. Then we get into the engine that makes this deck actually worth running, in my opinion, which is Alistair.
So explain this.
So, Alistair the Invoker has an entire engine devoted to him called the Invoker engine. His whole purpose is when he's normal summoned, he searches out the spell card Invocation. Just to make this easier, I'm just gonna go look for Invocation real fast.
How many of them do you run?
Ideally, I would love to run 2, but because of the way Invocation works, I can easily make it work with 1. You really only need 1, but the smart thing to do is to run 2. I'm just poor, and Invocation is a $30 card on its own, so I don't want to do that.
Very, very true.
But the way Invocation works is that it almost works like its own polymerization, except it has a specialized thing that it can do with Alistair. Now, what Alistair searches out Invocation is upon normal summon.
Alistair's broken.
Alistair is extremely broken.
Yeah. And then
He searches out
shuffles it back, and
he searches out Invocation upon being summoned. Then Invocation will activate its effect, and it sits here and uses Alistair and 1 card of any attribute. Because Alistair has an entire extra deck profile to himself, he has 1 extra deck monster that can be summoned off of Invocation for each attribute. So the thing that makes Invocation really potent is the fact that it allows you to target either player's graveyard for the fusion material. So if you play Invocation and you run Alistair as one of the materials, and then regardless of whatever your opponent is sitting here running, you can banish one of their cards to bring out one of the monsters.
And for Invocation, you can actually toss it from your hands to your graveyard instead of banishing it.
Yes, and you can toss it from your hand from your graveyard instead of banishing it. Exactly. And the other effect that Invocation likes to have is that you can target a banished Alistair,
And recycle it.
put it back into your hand, and then Invocation will recycle itself back into the deck. Thus is why.
Next turn.
And then you can just play the Alistair that you just put in your hand that turn for the Invocation effect to bring Invocation back out of the deck into your hand,
but
so it
Link
recycles.
stops extra deck.
Yes,
so
Link stops extra deck, yes. But hopefully you've got enough of your Metaphys engine on the field by the time you would have to deal with any Link monsters to make it so that it's kind of invalid for that to happen. So it really depends on just how quick you can get there. But that's just the Invocation. That's just Invocation. For the rest of the monsters, I have Necroface, who's really just there as an emergency, just in case like all of my resources end up in banished. He can put them all back. But then it also has the added benefit where if I, for instance, use Ragnarok's effect to banish the top 3, and Necroface ends up being one of those 3, I get to banish an additional 5 just to get more Metaphys effects off. And then, of course, because this is a almost completely light deck with the exception of Necroface and Alistair, we have our hand traps, so you know you have to run Honest at 3.
Hell yeah.
And you can use it during your turn, too.
And I can use it during my turn, too. Honest works specifically well with Tyrant Dragon, since it's a double attack kind of thing. And it also works pretty well for Ragnarok Dragon if he can get all 3 off of his effect, so 24 into 34, that actually works out pretty well. But it also works as Alistair, because Alistair has a light equivalent monster that can be brought out named Merkaba, who for some reason I can't seem to freaking find.
Which negate and banishes.
Yes, which also negates and banishes. There you are, there's Merkaba. He should be run at 3 if you're going to try to run this particular mix, but I currently only have 1 at the moment.
That's alright.
So now we get into the spell cards. The first one being Ace of Metaphys. Really good card. So once per turn, you can banish a Metaphys card from your hand. So, like I've been saying with all the Metaphys cards and their effects after being banished, so that also, helps. But when you banish that Metaphys card, you get to draw a card after. Then once per turn, if a Metaphys card in the owner's possession is banished, you can apply one of the following effects depending on whose turn it is. So if it's done on my turn, all monsters on the field lose 500 attack and defense except for Metaphys cards. Since my whole deck is Metaphys, it really doesn't make any difference. But if it's on the opponent's turn, it gives me a little bit of an extra kind of reprieve, because on my opponent's turn, if something is banished, I get to change the battle position of every monster on the field with the exception of Metaphys cards. So, since it doesn't target, it sits here and kind of like windstorms of attacks, or that, I believe that's what that card's called. Either way. Next spell card is their field card, which is Metaphys Factor. Metaphys Factor basically gives me a kind of... It's basically a card that Monarchs kind of wish they had. It gives me a free normal summon for any monster that's above level 5, and it lets me summon it without tribute. But when I do that, the card gets banished at the end of the turn. So yeah, I get a big ass monster for free, and then it gets banished at the end of the turn to activate its Metaphys effect. That's probably going to activate on the next standby phase. Then to help the Invoker engine, we have Book of Law, which basically says I tribute an invoked monster, which is the name for every one of the fusion monsters that are summoned using Alistair as a material. And it basically lets me kind of swap out one invoked monster for another that's a different attribute. So, say I have Macabre on the field and he's already used his once per turn effect, and then somebody finds a way to banish Macabre or take control of it, I can activate that to bring out a different Metaphys monster that may not be affected by it. Then Alistair also comes with his own field card, which is Magical Meltdown. Also a very useful card, because as soon as I play him, he searches out Alistair to let me start everything up. Then as long as this card is face up on the field, nobody can activate cards that can negate or stop the effect that involves fusion summoning a monster. So, you know, Solemn Strike, crap like that, can't stop it because it's a fusion summon. Then you have, because I have 3 field cards in this deck, you have your two terraformings. Running it at 3 kind of creates a dead card for me. Because this is a general high-level deck, you run 3 trade-ins. Reasoning, because also a high-level deck. Then because this is a banish-heavy deck, sometimes I just don't really care. So Defissure comes in, banishing any monster that hits the field, including the opponent. So it's good for me, it's not necessarily good for somebody else.
You're plussing a lot for that.
You end up plussing a lot for that. Then we end up getting into traps, that being Waterfall of Dragon Souls. You play 3, you play that at 3, has 2 effects. One of them is to add 1 worm monster from the deck to the hand. The other is to send any number of worm monsters from your hand and or face up on the field to the graveyard and draw the same number of cards, but +1. So it's kind of like Ignite Reload, but just for worms, and this is really the only worm-heavy deck that I can think of. Then you have Metaphys Dimension. This is one of my favorite cards. So if my opponent special summons a monster, right? During the damage step, if they special summon a monster, except during the damage step, I could target one of those cards and banish it during the end phase during the end phase of the next turn. And then if one of my other Metaphys monsters in the owner's possession, being me, is banished by that card, and this is already face up, you can target one of the opponent monsters you control and banish it. So it gives me the opportunity to, for once, instead of banishing my cards, I can banish yours. That ends up working very well for me. Then you get the kind of household staples, being Floodgate Trap Hole, a Wabaku in there just because I feel like it, and the tried and true, because it's a banished deck, you gotta have a Macros Cosmos in there.
Of course, I was waiting.
Don't necessarily need to run it at 3. It's kind of dead if you sit here and already have one in play and now it's already gone, and even without Defissure and Macros Cosmos banishing everything you have, the Metaphys engine alone does well enough at banishing itself that it doesn't really need them, but it's kind of nice to have.
Exactly.
And then, I mean, for extra deck, it doesn't have its own extra deck, but you just run the Invoke engine by itself. So you have the Invoke engine here. I run Purgatorio at 2. His effect is kind of hit and miss, but if my opponent is somebody that likes to swarm their board and everything like that, Purgatorio gains 200 attack for every card my opponent controls, and it can attack all monsters my opponent controls once each. Then if he attacks a defensive position monster, he tramples, so it works well for me. Cocytus is not really needed, can't be destroyed by card effects. He has a 29 defense point stat, so that's good. But he can also attack while he's in defense position, but when he does, he has to apply his attack stat for it. Raijin is also useful, because once per turn during either player's turn, I can target a face-up monster on the field and just turn it face down. So it's a nice little Book of Moon that I don't really have to have Book of Moon for.
Yep.
And then the card that you really want to have at 3, which is being Mechaba, because once per turn during either player's turn, when a spell or trap or monster effect is activated, I can send the same type of card from my hand to the graveyard to negate the activation and then banish that card.
Quick question. Why don't you run any of the dark ones? The low 4 ones?
Because I don't
Ingo XYZ sounds like that, you know,
I
right?
could go into XCs. I could go into XCs with that, but one,
this is a
I
level
don't.
8
One
deck, though.
personally,
Yeah,
one
but
this is a
think of it.
level 8 deck, so I wouldn't really do that. I wouldn't really run level 4 toolbox in here, so that's really what Killiga would be for. That, and I don't think Killiga is that good, only because he's 18.
Yeah, but like,
he's an
you
18.
use it for like XYZ something else.
He's like the
Yeah, but this
of,
deck
like-
doesn't really need XCs.
Yep.
Not really. And it's just an extra step that's not really needed, because if I sit here and put materials on XCs, they're gonna go to the graveyard, not to the banish zone, which is where I need them. And to be fair, there's really no XCs 4 that's really gonna do anything to not slow this deck down. Now if there's an XCs level 4 XCs rank 4 that like banishes opponent's board or banishes cards on my field or from my hand, then that's one thing. But to my knowledge, I don't think there is one. So it's best to just go with the engine. I don't fusion summon a lot in this deck anyway. Half of the time I'm gonna be relying mostly on the Metaphys engine, with the exception of Alistair, but I run Alistair at 3.
Alright.
The chances of me running into Alistair are pretty great in opening hand, but I have the Metaphys for that. There's really no need to XCs in this deck.
Do you want to say anything to the viewers?
Alright, well, thank you so much for the deck profile, Rolex.
My suggestion, if you're going to try to run this deck does run pretty fast, and there's a lot of effects to kind of remember, because it's perfectly feasible for you to end up with 5 Metaphys cards being banished in the same turn. You've got to remember what all of those effects are. So don't be afraid to kind of take it slow. Like, just take it one step at a time. Don't try to play too fast. This isn't Zodiac. You don't have to. This isn't Zodiac. It's acceptable for you to take 5 or so minutes to try to figure out what the hell your effects are going to do. And then the more you play, the faster you'll know, and then it'll all become second nature. I mean, it's still new.
Yeah.
It's an easy learning curve, but the speed is a little bit more advanced.
Yeah. So definitely. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for the deck profile, Rolex. Any shout-outs you want to give before we wrap things up?
Not at the moment. Moment, but I will give a shout-out to my host here. And hopefully you'll get another deck profile from me.
More than happy to have you back on again. Well, thank you so much, Rolex, for the deck profile. This has been the Mermail Master for the Team Time Riders YouTube channel. Catch you guys next time. Peace.